On the 6th of October 1976, Jiang Qing, the widow of Mao Zedong, the man who had ruled communist China from 1949 until his death in September 1976, was arrested. Jiang was rare in communist China as a woman who had risen to play a prominent role in the country's politics. Yet even her position as Mao's former wife couldn't prevent her from being sentenced to life in prison. What had she done to prompt the communist regime to destroy her once Mao's reign had ended? This is the story of Jiang Qing, the real driving force behind the Cultural Revolution. The woman known to history as Jiang Qing, Madame Mao, was born in the spring of 1914 in the town of Jiang in Shandong province, China. Her exact date of birth is disputed, though she was almost certainly born in March 1914. Her parents gave her the name Li Shumeng. Jiang Qing was a name she adopted many years later after joining the communist cause in China. Her father, Li De-wen, was a carpenter with his own shop. He also operated a small inn. Her mother, whose name has been lost to history, was Li De-wen's secondary wife or concubine, and Shumeng was the couple's only child. Though her father was a fairly prosperous tradesman, Shumeng and her mother benefited little from her father's prosperity. Li De-wen had a legitimate wife and 5 other older children. While she experienced a good deal of bullying, both physical and emotional, from her older half-siblings, her mother endured far worse from Li De-wen, a heavy drinker who often beat her. Some biographers have speculated that the relationship between Shumeng's parents might have come about following the family's engagement of her mother as a domestic servant. Life became even less stable for Shumeng and her mother in 1920. During the annual Lantern Festival, Li De-wen became excessively drunk and enraged by a disagreement with his second wife and savagely beat her with a spade, breaking one of her fingers. According to her own later account, 6-year-old Shumeng tried to defend her mother, and her father's spade struck her mouth, breaking one of her teeth. Shortly following this terrible episode, Li Shumeng's mother left the family home for good with her daughter in tow. Mother and daughter remained in Jiang for less than 2 years, during which time Shumeng started elementary school. She found the atmosphere little more bearable than her father's family home had been. The other students bullied her mercilessly for her awkwardness, her shabby clothes, and unconventional background, just as her siblings had done. She was expelled from her first elementary school after just 1 term. Li Shumeng was growing up in a tumultuous and often violent world. Just 3 years before she was born, the Chinese imperial system that had existed for thousands of years had been overthrown. A new republican government was established, though in reality the country descended into anarchy with local warlords claiming power in different parts of China. Shumeng regularly heard the crackle of gunfire on her way to school as local conflicts raged and the government tried to impose law and order. Life was especially difficult for Shumeng and her mother in these circumstances. Sometime in 1924 or 1925, Li De-wen died in a typhus outbreak. He left the bulk of his property and estate to his legitimate wife and children, but he also bequeathed to his secondary wife and illegitimate daughter the part ownership of a house. Li Shumeng's mother, now nearing 40 and beginning to suffer from significant health problems, wrote to her parents, who lived in Jinan in northwestern Shandong, for help. The elderly couple had only 1 other daughter, and were presumably relieved to have their daughter and grandchild come to live with them, and perhaps to help care for them in their old age. Using a portion of their small inheritance, Xu Meng and her mother purchased train tickets, packed their few belongings, and left for Jinan. Once there, Li Shumeng was given a new name, Li Yunhe. Whether she received her new name from her family or her new school is unclear, but either way, almost everyone who knew her agreed that the name did not suit her. Yunhe, meaning crane in the clouds, suggested a far more serene, gentle and passive character than Li Yunhe possessed, as her early experiences had made her rebellious, defiant, and fiercely independent. Rather than stoically accepting mean or poor treatment at others' hands, Yunhe invariably fought back and asserted herself. After what she had seen of life as a poor, marginalized daughter, Yunhe could only reject the Confucian ideals which her family and her school were trying to teach her. A virtuous woman, according to Confucian philosophy, obeyed her father, her husband, and, after his death, her own son. She was to be modest, chaste, neat, quiet, and a willing and able housekeeper. But to Yunhe, the 3 obediences and the 4 virtues were nothing more than handy propaganda, and her life experiences had taught her to resist these traditional Chinese values. 10-year-old Yunhe resumed her elementary education in Jinan, but fared little better than she had in Jiucheng. Her classmates still bullied her, ridiculed her awkwardness, and ostracized her for being the girl without a father. Rather than run home and cry to her family, however, Yunhe instead grew harder. Nourishing a fierce pride, she refused to speak when her family inquired about her bruises or her torn book bag. Yunhe finished her formal education in 1926 or 1927, when she was about 12 or 13 years old. Around this time, Yunhe and her mother traveled to Tianjin, perhaps for better work prospects, where they stayed for several months with one of Yunhe's half-sisters. Yunhe did not return to school, but earned her keep doing housework for her older sister. She particularly hated having to do household chores and tried instead to get a job rolling tailor-made cigarettes for a local tobacco company, which her family was quick to forbid. In 1928, her mother married again, although the details of her marriage and new life are unknown. Yunhe continued to live with her grandparents in Jinan for only a few months more. She did not return to school, and it is possible that her grandparents could not afford the fees. Instead, in a move that seemed to suit her unconventional and rather individualistic personality, she joined a local theatre troupe. It is unclear whether Yunhe ran away from her grandparents' home to become an actor, or if she was coerced into doing so. Whatever the circumstances, Yunhe appeared to love the performing life and remained with the company for a year or more. As Yunhe gained more experience and was given more and more significant acting roles, she realized that directors and audiences liked her. She began to gain confidence in her developing artistic abilities as a result. One night, many months after Yunhe had disappeared from her grandparents' home, the elderly couple attended a production of the Beijing opera Beating the Princess at a small suburban theatre in Jinan. When the leading lady took the stage in a magnificent silk robe and a headdress bedecked in pearls, Yunhe's grandparents were shocked to discover that the graceful and talented ingenue on stage was their own granddaughter. The couple were forced to pay an unknown but apparently exorbitant sum of money to persuade the theatre owner to release Yunhe from the company and allow her to return home. We do not know what Yunhe's reaction was to being removed from the theatre company, but there is reason to believe she was disappointed, for she actively sought more involvement in the theatre and artistic training shortly after returning home with her grandparents. In 1929, Yunhe passed preliminary exams and was accepted to the new Experimental Arts Academy, funded by the Shandong provincial government. As one of the few low-income students to gain admission to the school, Yunhe received subsidies in the form of free accommodation and meals, as well as a regular allowance of 6 yuan per month. She studied acting, playwriting, and music with accomplished professors, trained in both Chinese and Western styles and techniques. It was during this year at theatre school that Yunhe's later political beliefs and overall worldview began to develop. Although the school was established in an old Confucian temple in Jinan, the professors were young, with modern ideas and political beliefs, which leaned closer to the communists than to the nationalists in the Chinese Civil War that had broken out between these two groups in 1927. The left-leaning stance of teachers and students at the acting academy did not lead to them opposing foreign influence in China or prevent them from embracing Western artistic mediums, styles and techniques, or even European plays. Similarly, while they embraced the collectivist social and political ethic of communism, they admired the romance and individualism of Western art, many examples of which the later Chinese Communist Party would officially deem capitalistic and counter-revolutionary. It was during her year at this experimental theatre school that Yunhe first read Henrik Ibsen's A Doll's House, an outright indictment of marriage as a social and political prison for women. This play resonated deeply with Yunhe, and it remained her favorite dramatic work. Yunhe's personality was beginning to emerge more decidedly at theatre school. As only one of 3 girls studying there, she had a certain amount of notoriety among her fellow students, which she amplified with her boldness. Her classmates remembered her as pretty, outgoing, plain-spoken to the point of being labelled pushy, and unafraid to be daring. On one occasion, a group of her male classmates set one another a challenge to prove their manhood. The student who would brave the forbidding temple sanctuary to remove and retrieve the headdress from a statue of Confucius there would be accounted the most courageous. This challenge went unanswered for several days, as none of the boys were fearless enough to attempt it. They were shocked one evening to see Yunhe stroll casually out of the temple sanctuary with the headdress in hand. "I never thought that a girl could do that," remembered one of her male classmates. Unfortunately, the experimental theatre school was closed a year after it opened, a victim of the turbulent political environment. Yunhe briefly tried her luck in Beijing, securing a few small roles, but she was apparently not considered sophisticated or well-trained enough for Beijing opera, and she soon returned to Jinan. Unwilling to work outside the arts, and even more unwilling to accept a position as a domestic servant or other similar position for which her minimal education qualified her, 16-year-old Yunhe got married instead. Her husband, a wealthy merchant's son named Fei, had first seen Yunhe in one of her early theatre productions and had become an instant and ardent admirer. Her family were likely relieved. For instance, biographers speculate that her grandparents were supportive of the marriage because a dowry was typically required, and there was no one else in Yunhe's life who could have provided it. Perhaps they were simply grateful that Yunhe had entered an honorable marriage and would now presumably settle down to a more traditional life, which would bring her security. As it turned out, Yunhe's first marriage lasted only a few months. Though he no doubt found the prospect of marriage to an actress exciting initially, Fei soured on his new wife within weeks, and Yunhe returned the favor. As tradition demanded, she had moved into Fei's family home following their marriage, but she had no intention of performing the traditional wifely role. Her mother-in-law disliked her for what she viewed as Yunhe's laziness. She slept late every morning, did few, if any, household chores, did no cooking, and went out to parties, dinners, and the theatre with her friends at night. Fei's outraged mother complained to her son that, instead of taking care of her family, Yunhe seemed to expect others to wait on her. Fei and Yunhe soon began to argue constantly. He had believed she would accept the traditional role and duties of marriage, but she was affronted by what she viewed as his unreasonable and unrealistic expectations. She gave Fei a choice: move out of his family home with her, or grant her an unconditional divorce. Fei and Yunhe divorced in 1931. In 1930s China, divorce was seen as a significant act of emancipation for members of the nascent women's movement. Like girls and women who resisted the traditional practice of foot binding, to seek a divorce was an act of women's liberation. However, it was also still largely controversial for most people, and it is possible that Yunhe's split from her husband served to distance her from her family. Rather than return to her grandparents, she traveled to the bustling seaside metropolis of Qingdao to attempt a fresh start. Yunhe arrived there in the spring of 1931 and promptly sought out one of her professors from theatre school, Jiao Taimo, who was now employed as a professor and dean at Qingdao University. She did not have the academic credentials for admittance to the university, and neither did Dean Zhao know of any theatre work for which he could recommend her, but he kindly set her up with temporary accommodation in the university dormitories. Deciding to try another tactic, Yunhe paid a visit to Zhao's wife, Yu Shan. Moved to compassion by the girl's story, Yu used her influence to get Yunhe a job as a clerk at the university library on campus. Although she was described as pushy and unaccommodating by some who knew her there, Yunhe made the most of her new circumstances and received much of her political education while she was living in Qingdao. Though she could not formally register at the university, she attended lectures on theatre, literature and music, as well as politics, history and philosophy. Yunhe, well situated by her difficult childhood to absorb the outrage against the long-standing class system, readily subscribed to many of the central tenets of communism. Class struggle was a concept that particularly resonated with Yunhe. Most of Yunhe's direct engagement with communist politics in Qingdao occurred as a result of her involvement in local theatre. She joined the Seaside Theatre Company, a political theatre troupe which wrote, staged and toured small-scale productions promoting revolutionary values, as well as anti-imperial and anti-foreign messages in the wake of the Japanese occupation of northeastern China. While most young Chinese artists at this time aligned more closely with the communists than the nationalists, few broadcast this fact at a time when the nationalists were close to defeating the communists in the Civil War. Nonetheless, Yunhe secretly became a party member during her residence in Qingdao. Friends reflected years later that Yunhe's understanding of politics and philosophy was never very sophisticated. In fact, one acquaintance remarked that she probably couldn't have explained clearly what capitalism actually was and what the distinctions between it and communism were. Despite her relative lack of political sophistication, Yunhe became a zealous party member. Another factor which strengthened Yunhe's political education in Qingdao was a new relationship. Yu Qi-wei was a genial and intelligent biology major at the university, the handsome younger brother of Dean Zhao's wife, Yu Shan. Yunhe and Qi-wei met at his sister's house and soon began dating one another. They fell in love and opted for an informal cohabitation rather than a formalized marriage, which was unusual at the time. Though Qi-wei was quite a brilliant student, he spent most of his time engaged in politics, a fact reflected in his average grades. They worked together assiduously, both in secret and in public, for the general promotion of the cause, especially through the theatre, but also through participation in public protests. In late 1932, Qi-wei was arrested for his political activities and only secured his release through the intervention of an influential uncle who worked for the nationalist government. Yun-He was questioned by police about her partner's political activities, but it is unclear to what extent she cooperated with their investigation. When Chi Wei was finally released, he did not return to Yun-He, but left Qingdao quietly to pursue another mission on the Communist Party's behalf. We do not know why his relationship with Yun-He ended so abruptly. Biographers have speculated that she may have incriminated him during her police interviews, whether intentionally or unintentionally. Whatever the reason, when Chi Wei left, Yun-He was heartbroken. As she had previously done when she left Jinan, she endeavored to look forward rather than backward and decided to try for a new life in Shanghai, the center of the country's developing film industry. 19-year-old Yun-He arrived at Shanghai in 1933. The richest and most cosmopolitan urban center in China, Shanghai was known as the city for sale, and the film industry attracted numerous young and hungry artists from all over China. As was the case in Beijing, casting directors and theater owners had their pick of hopeful artists, and Yun-He initially had a hard time becoming established here. She secured some limited work with local political theater troupes similar to the one she had worked with in Qingdao. But the newest artists at theater companies were apt to end up sewing costumes, painting sets, and doing bit parts for months before being offered more significant roles, if any. To make ends meet, Yun-He took a teaching job, which luckily included free accommodation. Yun-He's busy new life did not preclude her continued involvement in politics, as most Shanghai artists at the time had communist political sympathies. The arts in China, especially theater, had always been a political arena. In the former imperial era, theater bolstered the class system, reinforced Confucian values, and encouraged social order. By the 1930s, theater was expressing and disseminating revolutionary values. Yun-He joined the League of Left-Wing Theater Artists and also engaged in classes in the arts, politics, and philosophy at Shanghai University, where the academic establishment had similar communist leanings. Unfortunately for Yun-He, these activities led to her imprisonment during a nationalist government crackdown of Shanghai. Differing accounts exist of Yun-He's jail term. According to her own report, she remained incarcerated for 8 months and was subject to cruel and neglectful treatment. She claimed to have maintained a fierce and defiant attitude toward the authorities, and also noted that she lost a dangerous amount of weight in jail. Her release came about following an intervention by a friend and on health grounds. After her release from prison, she appeared dramatically thinner, drawn and pale. According to police records, however, Yun-He was imprisoned for only 3 months, not 8. Contrary to Yun-He's own account, the guards who watched over her treated her well, and they remembered her as charming with a good sense of humor. No doubt she was anxious for both freedom and self-preservation. As soon as Yun-He had dictated and signed a confession, the guards claimed that she was released with a warning to distance herself from any future communist activities. When Yun-He was released, she did just that, refocusing her energy instead on pursuing her career as an actor. To that end, she soon took a new stage name, Lan Ping, meaning Blue Apple. In 1935, a production of Ibsen's Nora opened at Shanghai's Golden City Theatre. The play ran for 2 months, an unusually long run for any play in Shanghai. Opening night was well attended. All were allegedly transfixed by Lan Ping, the former Li Yun-He, in the title role. Her reportedly incredible performance finally brought her to the notice of Shanghai's artistic community and theatre-goers. 1935, recalled one critic for a local newspaper, was the year of Nora. Lan Ping soon began to get steadier acting work. She never became wealthy, but nonetheless achieved greater financial security than she ever had before. She gladly embraced her new independence, as it allowed her to upgrade her lifestyle. For a person with such a revolutionary bent of mind, she enjoyed a rather bourgeois existence and embraced many Western attitudes and fashions. Like many young women artists in diverse and cosmopolitan Shanghai, she admired the films and attitudes of Greta Garbo and Mae West, and she often dressed and did her makeup in the Hollywood style. She pursued romantic relationships on her own terms. Tang Na, a Shanghai theatre critic, first saw Lan Ping on stage as Nora in her breakout role. He was immediately infatuated with her, and the two soon began dating, moving in together after a few months. As Lan Ping's star began to rise with the beginning of her film career, she and Tang Na were sometimes mentioned in Shanghai's gossip columns. Her visibility led to opportunities at both political film companies and major studios. Though she starred in at least 9 films during this period, Lan Ping's biggest successes in Shanghai's film industry were Old Bachelor Wang and Blood on Wolf Mountain. Despite the apparent glamour of their life together among the city's bohemian artists, Lan Ping and Tang Na had a tempestuous and ultimately toxic relationship. Despite their issues, the couple married in 1936. The marriage fell apart within a year and almost certainly should have ended before then. Both seemed to expect absolute faithfulness from the other, and yet neither seemed able to give it in return. Lan Ping favored a divorce, but was forced to remain with her husband for several more months after Tang Na, in his despair at the prospect of losing her, attempted on several occasions to take his own life. By 1937, the Shanghai Lan Ping knew and loved was beginning to disappear. The Japanese were poised to invade after the Marco Polo Bridge incident triggered the outbreak of the Second Sino-Japanese War, and the film and theatre industry would be sure to grind to a halt in Shanghai. Local artists were already dispersing, and soon the communists and nationalists would put aside their differences to fight the common enemy in what was effectively the beginning of the Second World War in the Far East, before it ever broke out in Europe. Before she left Shanghai, Lan Ping authored a local journal article entitled Our Life, a revolutionary artist's manifesto which clearly presaged some of her most infamous later deeds during the Cultural Revolution of the 1960s. In this, she insisted that art and drama were social tools and vehicles for change rather than bourgeois diversions. Artists were not mere dolls, the playthings of audiences or the prey of producers and directors. They were revolutionaries, active creators, and must, above all, be independent-minded and strong in spirit. This manifesto, her ex-husband Tang Na later remarked cynically, was Lan Ping's meal ticket to the rising establishment of the Communist Party. But there is good reason to believe that she meant every word of what she wrote in this article. After she left Shanghai, Lan Ping journeyed to Yan'an and the headquarters of the communist rebels led by Mao Zedong. The renewed threats to China of imperialism and capitalism had convinced her to pursue the revolutionary cause directly, rather than simply as an artist. She first reconnected with some of her past party comrades, who were helpful in introducing her and vouching for her with the Communist Party officials surrounding Mao. Lan Ping was accepted at Yan'an and began taking classes at Lushun College, where she also taught drama classes herself, part-time. Mao Zedong's third marriage was on the rocks by this point. His then-wife, He Zejun, was one of the few revolutionary women who had been with Mao and his rebel army all through the Long March back in 1934 and 1935, when the communists had only barely managed to avoid complete defeat by the nationalists by breaking out of an encirclement and marching a long distance across China to regroup. Unfortunately, her husband had tired of her. Disgusted and betrayed, He Zejun finally left Yan'an and Mao. Lan Ping and Mao Zedong first became acquainted in the fall of 1938, when Mao came to give a talk at the college. Lan Ping was present, listening raptly as Mao discussed the social and political importance of art, and she rose to her feet to clap enthusiastically when he finished his speech. Mao was much less remote to his supporters at this early stage and easily approachable on the streets of Yan'an. Lan Ping found the courage to introduce herself to Mao after his lecture, and the two shared some brief and friendly conversation. They continued to meet and spend time together in the ensuing weeks, and soon became lovers. When they decided to marry, the couple encountered significant opposition from Mao's fellow communist leaders, particularly the future Premier Zhou Enlai, General Zhu De, and Chief of Staff Liu Shaoqi. Lan Ping was controversial. She had come to Yan'an from Shanghai, a nationalist stronghold that most rural communists considered bloated with bourgeois privilege, excess, and permissive nods to capitalism and imperialism. She was also attractive, stylish, and modern, everything that the poor, unpolished, and hard-working proletariat was supposed to despise according to communist theory. Mao insisted to his top officials, however, that his marriage to Lan was necessary. Without her love, he said, he could not continue the revolution. He even threatened to return home to Hunan province and become a mere farmer. The party and military officials surrounding Mao eventually relented. He was granted a divorce from He Zejun and permitted to marry Lan Ping, as long as she stayed out of the running of the communist hierarchy. Thus, within just a year and a half of her arrival at Yan'an, Lan Ping was married to one of the most powerful men in China. To mark the occasion of their wedding, they chose Lan Ping's new name together, Jiang Qing, meaning Green River. It referenced a line from a sentimental Tang Dynasty poem. The first 10 years of Jiang and Mao's marriage were harmonious between them, though they were lived against the backdrop of the immensely destructive war with Japan down to 1945, and then the resumption of the civil war with the nationalists. Jiang Qing gave birth to a daughter in 1940, the only child she and Mao would have together. Interestingly, the girl was not given her father's name, instead being given Jiang's original maiden name. Li Na lived closely with both her parents during her early childhood and could often be found playing on the floor of her father's office while Mao was working or taking meetings with party members. She was raised as a sister to He Zejun's youngest daughter Li Min, who, strangely, was also given Jiang's maiden name. Though she had railed all her life against submitting to traditional marriage and domesticity, Jiang nonetheless seemed happy in these early years. She served as one of Mao's secretaries, a vague and barely articulated position which included report writing and general paperwork on Mao's behalf. She was honored as Mao's wife and admired for her seeming grit during the war against the Japanese and later the struggle with the nationalists. As time went by, she began to demand special accommodations and was invariably catered to. Such was her influence with Mao. Even when the ardor of their marriage began to fade and Mao's eye began to wander to younger women once again, Jiang did not react the way her predecessor had. She tolerated his many mistresses and affairs. In 1949, the Communists finally defeated the Nationalists, the remnants of which fled under the leadership of Chiang Kai-shek to Taiwan. Mao's triumphant establishment as the ruler of the new People's Republic of China created greater distance between husband and wife. Mao was now busier than ever, and the bureaucratic and security apparatus which grew up around him at the capital in Beijing served to remove Jiang Qing from her husband's daily routine. As the wife of a leading revolutionary on the road, her presence during strategy and policy discussions had been accepted. Now, in the halls of power, where women were rarely, if ever, elevated to influential positions in China, she found herself excluded. She had faced significant health challenges during the war, even suffering from an attack of tuberculosis, for which she underwent a month of treatment in the Soviet Union. But it was when Jiang Qing found herself blocked from any position of power that Jiang's health, both physical and mental, began to suffer. Aware of her desire to be more than a secretary, Mao arranged for Jiang to head one or two committees charged with assessing theatre and film for alignment with party politics. Initially excited and motivated, Jiang dove into the work. But she soon began to find the position infuriating, as her recommendations were only heeded when Mao happened to agree with them, which he frequently did not. Her working relationships worsened, as did her colleagues' opinions of her. Jiang had always been a defiant, forceful personality and difficult to work with, but now she became even more difficult. Numerous interviews with contemporaries recalled Jiang's increasingly unreasonable behavior in the 1950s. She made many enemies among Chinese filmmakers, playwrights, and theatre directors for criticizing or attempting to ban their work. Though Jiang was now a mature and politically powerful woman, she had gained little more intellectual sophistication. She believed that art in the new China should only focus on and celebrate proletarian victory and communist values. Anger from her painful childhood may have also been at play here, with her ideas about political justice being bound up with the notion of personal vengeance. Those who displeased her often found themselves and their work dealt with more harshly than they deserved to be. Her feelings of impotence and her anxiety at the new distance between her and her husband began to manifest in her health. Depressed and bored to distraction, she began to complain of feeling physically ill. Dr. Li Sui, Mao's private doctor, recalled that, as far as he could see, there was nothing really wrong with Jiang Qing. Her frequent fatigue, mysterious aches and pains, heart palpitations and anxiety were common, he said, to virtually all of the patients he treated among Mao's inner circle. The exceptionally high stress and culture of fear which prevailed among those at the top of the power structure was striking. Jiang Qing was sent away to the Soviet Union several times during the 1950s to convalesce in private hospitals. Sometimes she got the impression that her husband was sending her away to avoid her or keep her from meddling further in politics. She received few visitors, but one notable and reliable caller was Zhou Enlai. Though several of Mao's top officials visited the Soviet Union periodically, few of them liked Jiang enough to pay her a visit. Zhou, however, was one of the few power brokers who remained unfailingly kind to her, whatever he thought of Jiang personally. He brought her delicacies and news from home, making every effort to cheer her up, for which she was grateful. Despite this, Jiang would eventually alienate him too, by attempting to have him removed from office. In 1955, it was confirmed that Jiang was genuinely ill after tests revealed that she had cervical cancer. She returned to the Soviet Union for cobalt-60 treatments and remained there for over a year, recovering. She was made quite comfortable in a private hospital in Moscow and a resort in Yalta with access to a film projector and a regularly replenished selection of Western movies, technically banned in both Russia and China. She ate well, listened to opera, and read a great deal. Her attitude toward those she considered subordinates, however, continued to get worse. She would complain that her bath water or the temperature in her room was too hot one moment and then too cold when her staff tried to address the issue. By the time Jiang Qing returned to Beijing, a new decade had dawned, and the political situation in the capital was quite different. Mao's popularity had declined in the wake of the Great Leap Forward. The chairman's disastrously executed 5-year plan to reorganize agricultural activity and maximize the growth of Chinese industry. The results had been horrific, leading to one of the worst famines in human history, during which tens of millions of people died of starvation. Trenchant criticism of Mao was now rising across China, even amongst Politburo members and Mao's top officials. But rather than admit the failures and human miseries resulting from his regime, Mao doubled down. He sought instead to cement his power through a program of cultural and artistic reform which would squash such avenues of dissent and allay any challenges to his power from popular leaders of the communist movement like Deng Xiaoping or Zhou Enlai. It was in this context that Mao finally granted power to Jiang Qing, of the kind which he had long sought. She would become one of the key architects of the Cultural Revolution that sought to reaffirm Mao's control over Communist China from 1966 onwards. As one of the main organizers of it, Jiang was a member of the Gang of Four, along with Jiang Chongqiao, Yao Wenyuan, and Wang Hongwen. This quartet oversaw the Cultural Revolution on Mao's behalf, though Jiang was the most powerful of the four. The Cultural Revolution was geared around the idea of instilling a rigorous communist purity into Chinese society. Jiang Qing began by reading and evaluating more than 1,000 artistic works, including films, operas, plays, and ballets, for their conformity to the Maoist principles of socialism, as well as for their lionization of the proletariat. Any works that did not conform to the party line, any art that glorified the wealthy, capitalists, imperialists, past emperors, or the aristocracy, was deemed bourgeois or counter-revolutionary, and were either reformed or banned. Jiang also undertook to identify the most superior works of art in this respect, and made sure they were recognized publicly as good art, both politically and morally sound. Thousands of artists whose works made them politically suspect had their reputations and livelihoods ruined, and came under attack from Red Guards, which were often little more than gangs of violent youths whipped up into a frenzy by Mao's Cultural Revolution. Those whose political crimes were considered especially egregious were fired from their jobs or forced to undergo ritualized public humiliation, marching slowly through the streets in dunce caps while the crowds jeered and abused them. The most controversial political offenders were imprisoned, some for years on end, and most without charge or trial. Worst of all, Jiang seemed often to wield her terrible new influence on those against whom she held personal grudges. For Jiang, class struggle was a vengeful process in which the proletariat punished and subordinated their oppressors. Jiang's role in the Cultural Revolution saw her reach a position of power which she had never previously held in China, although Mao still ultimately made the final call on all matters of policy. It was the chairman's habit to discreetly pit the most powerful and closest to him against one another in order to keep himself at the center of all possible intrigue. He often criticized one official to another, just to test them, to see how they would respond. Still, Jiang was certainly one of the most powerful people in China between 1966 and 1976. Under her direction, Red Guards terrorized teachers and lecturers in the country's schools and universities, accusing them of political impurity, while the nation's cinemas, libraries, and theaters all became battlegrounds in the bizarre conflict which was both an effort to enforce political purity and also a performative campaign in which the government was well aware that it was systematically terrorizing innocent people with the primary aim of strengthening Mao's position after the disastrous years of the Great Leap Forward. The worst years of the Cultural Revolution, which would ultimately claim the lives of anywhere between 500,000 and 2 million Chinese people in waves of political violence, took place between 1966 and 1969, though it dragged on well into the 1970s. By the mid-1970s, it became clear that the chairman's continued ill health indicated that he was in the final stages of Lou Gehrig's disease, and the talk around him began to turn to succession. It is important to remember that Jiang was only just about to enter her early 60s. Following the death of Zhou Enlai from cancer early in 1976 and the ousting of Deng Xiaoping, she may have believed that there was a path to her claiming power once Mao died. Though she had made many enemies during her rise to power, she had the support of roughly 40% of the Politburo. Jiang also had a good deal of support among China's youth, rural workers, and roughly half the army. During the summer of 1976, Mao sent Jiang what one biographer described as a farewell poem. "You have been wronged," it read. "Today we are separating into two worlds. May each keep his peace. In the struggle of the past 10 years, I have tried to reach the peak of revolution, but I was not successful. You, though, could reach the top. If you fail, you will plunge into a fathomless abyss. Your body will shatter. Your bones will break." This missive seems to suggest that Jiang had Mao's support to become Madam Chairwoman after his passing. And yet, when the top officials came together some weeks later for their final meeting with Mao at his bedside, he appeared much more ambivalent about his wife's potential succession. In fact, he stated quite clearly that he did not think there should be any sort of presidency at all after he died, but that a broad, multi-generational coalition should govern and lead together. "It is up to the Politburo to decide whether Jiang Qing shall be included," he said. Toward the end of his speech, his voice began to fail as he grew weaker. "Help Jiang Qing," he began, before his voice trailed off, and the party members strained to hear his last muttered whisper. His wife's supporters among them claimed that he said, "Help Jiang Qing carry the red flag." Moderates in the room claimed he said, "Help Jiang Qing correct her errors." Mao died on the 6th of September 1976. By then, Jiang had failed to cultivate any support among Mao's top officials or attempt to repair relations with those whose enmity she had earned over the years. At a meeting of the Politburo just days after Mao's death, she encountered no immediate opposition. But less than 2 days after they adjourned, guards sent by the top political and military officials burst into Jiang's bedroom in the middle of the night and arrested her. Jiang spent 4 years incarcerated without charge or trial, though the conditions in which she lived were quite good, and she was permitted regular visits from her daughter, Li Na. By 1980, Deng Xiaoping had claimed power and was overseeing a program of reform that rejected Mao's legacy. The Politburo, in order to put the past behind them, now turned their attention to Jiang Qing once again. She could not be released because of her previous role in the Cultural Revolution, but neither could they make her a martyr for unreformed Maoists. Deng was facing criticism from the left for seeming to have betrayed the revolution with his more moderate policies. The way to rewrite and contextualize history, the moderates believed, was not to blame Mao for the failures of the revolution that many still deeply revered, it seemed far easier to blame Jiang Qing and the other members of the Gang of Four who had overseen the Cultural Revolution. Jiang Qing expressed incredulity when she was informed that she would be placed on trial 4 years after the death of Mao and her arrest. Nonetheless, on the 20th of November 1980, the trial of Jiang and the other 3 members of the Gang of Four began. They were charged with anti-party activities and the persecution of hundreds of thousands of people, leading to tens of thousands of deaths. Far from being cowed by those who sought to force a confession, Jiang remained defiant and unwilling to acknowledge or admit any guilt. She reiterated that her so-called crimes were political and were committed under direct orders from Mao. If she were a criminal, Jiang insisted, then so were most of her judges. They too had carried out Mao's orders to persecute individuals and to use the powers of the state according to the chairman's direction. "I was Chairman Mao's dog," Jiang insisted. "I bit whomever he asked me to bite. What you are doing now," she continued, "is asking a widow to pay her husband's debt. To you all I say, I am happy and honored to pay Chairman Mao's debt." The trial continued for several days, but it was effectively a show trial for Jiang and the other 3 members of the Gang of Four. In the end, when the ruling came down in January 1981, Jiang Qing was found guilty and sentenced to death. However, the judges, still afraid of popular unrest, commuted her sentence to life in prison, provided that she maintained good behavior. Jiang spent the last 11 years of her life incarcerated. In the mid-1980s, she contracted throat cancer and was temporarily released to hospital care for treatment. Watching China slowly change outside her windows, Jiang began to fall into depression. Just as the Soviet Union had gradually reformed in the 1950s and 1960s after the passing of Joseph Stalin, so too China moved to a different model after Mao's time. A new economy with some Western elements was developing, one that would prove far more successful than the controlled economy Mao had disastrously tried to oversee. By the end of the 1980s, it was clear that a new country was emerging, in which Deng's reforms were the key determinant, not Mao's legacy. As Jiang grew older and sicker, she fell into despair. In the early morning hours of the 14th of May 1991, Jiang Qing took her own life. She was 77 years old. The note she left behind read, "Today the revolution has been stolen by the revisionist clique, and the result of this omission is that unending evils have been unleashed on the Chinese people and nation. Chairman, your student and fighter is coming to see you." The Politburo would not permit Jiang Qing to have a funeral. She and Mao had wished to be buried next to one another, but their last wishes were not adhered to. While Mao was mummified and placed on display in a memorial building in Tiananmen Square, a stern and forbidding sentinel forever guarding the spirit of the revolution, Jiang was quietly cremated and her remains laid to rest in Futian Cemetery in Beijing. Her grave marker bears the name Li Yun-he, not Jiang Qing. Jiang Qing, or the White-Boned Demon as she came to be known, had lived across most of the events which transformed modern China. She was born just 3 years after the millennia-old imperial system came to an end, and she lived through the Civil War, the Second World War, and the establishment of the People's Republic. She had had many names and many lives, first as a poor child, then as an actress, then as a politician's wife, and finally as one of the orchestrators of the Cultural Revolution. Her position was somewhat strange to an extent. Mao and the Communist Party did not allow her to wield much power as his wife for many years. It was only in 1966, after the disaster of the Great Leap Forward had threatened Mao's hold on power, that she truly rose to prominence, as Mao tried to utilize the Cultural Revolution as a means of re-cementing his position. It was then that she finally rose to prominence as a member of the Gang of Four. Over the next decade, her influence over China was entirely nefarious. The Cultural Revolution ultimately led to the deaths of hundreds of thousands, perhaps even millions of Chinese people. The exact numbers are unknown. Worse still was the collective scarring of Chinese society as it attacked itself for the better part of a decade. Though Mao could never be criticized by the government of the country he shaped so much in the 20th century, after his death, those who had survived sought revenge against the Gang of Four. Far from claiming any sort of power for herself, the Cultural Revolution was ultimately the undoing of Jiang Qing as well. What do you think of Jiang Qing? Does she deserve to be as reviled as she is, or has she been unduly demonized because her detractors could never publicly criticize Mao, since criticizing Mao was to admit that the revolution had failed? Please let us know in the comment section, and in the meantime, thank you very much for watching.